So hi, and welcome to the Prism of Perspective. I'm super happy to have a good friend of mine here today, Robbie Higgins. We've spent some time together doing some men's work, and literally when I heard his story, it was right when I was beginning to explore the idea of doing the Prism of Perspective, and the way that he was able to look at his life and make really cool pivots was so clear to me. A few different things. One, that he was really paying attention to and being inspired by his beliefs and allowing them to move, and that he recaptured control of how he generated energy in his life. And so I wanted to share that story with you guys today. So here's my good friend, Robbie. Let's rock and roll. How are you doing today, Robbie?
Great to be here. I've always, I've kind of been watching you for the last handful of years since we've known each other, and watched your process and admire what you've accomplished so far. So when you asked me to be here, I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Well, good. I really appreciate you coming here and being with us, being here, even going out of the way to be here. So thank you so much for that. So what I would love to do is kind of look at your life through the prism of perspective. Of course, we're going to look at that and reflect on how your beliefs and your energy and your presence either impacted decisions or continues to impact decisions. But let's go back and kind of think about your life in little chapters, right? Because we get our beliefs created through our life, when we're young, and then we have an opportunity to revisit them. And you've shared some stories with me about your youth and, some of the great benefits of the teachings that your father brought to you, but possibly some of the other beliefs that may have come out of that as well. So share with me a little bit about your youth and kind of the foundational beliefs that you were developing.
Yeah, the relationship with the father. Right? Take it all the way back to Greek mythology. Yeah, my dad, he's still with us, still here. I love my father, no doubt about it. And he taught me a good work ethic. He showed me a good work ethic. And he was even there, coaching my Little League baseball teams and stuff. So that was his way of showing me that he loved me. But in the same hand, I was raised by a man who never told me he loved me. Right. And that was just one of those things that later in life, hindsight, I look back and think about it. I was like, well, damn, I've been going through my life with this message behind this lack of message that I was given, that, it's like, okay, if I can't be loved by my father, then how can I be loved at all? It was this unconscious belief that ran, below the surface there.
Right. Which is, I think, a really great reminder to us, because for your dad, that may have been something really uncomfortable or difficult for him to do. And so sometimes we're trying to help people understand, or we're sharing our love with them in the ways that we give rather than the ways that they receive. Mm-hmm. And so in our own lives, how important it is to pay attention to making sure that the messages that we're sending out are actually being received as intended, because of the consequences that come out of it, right?
Right. And as you get into the love languages and everything.
Right. Yeah. You get into different love languages. And for your dad, it might have been acts of service, right? So he's like, here, I'm going to acts of service. And at some level, as a child, you really need them all, right? Because you come into the world and we're looking for, where we fit in, and are we acceptable, or is we good as we are good enough, right? And if we're not kind of getting that message, you're like, okay, what's missing? And then sometimes we try and find other things to fill that void. Right. What were some of your void fillers at the time?
Yeah, I think, and you you touched on it there. It's the and I acknowledge even now I'm still to this day dealing with the not good enough shadow that just kind of lingers there. The only difference is I've cultivated a relationship with it. But I think, that showed up. And I mean, being a teenager is hard to begin with. Right. It's just hard. It's just like, this is that period of time where we're moving away from this known family unit and trying to figure out how we as individuals fit into the world. And so we try to fit into our peer groups. And I would say my mechanisms that came out of that was, I look back and I think, man, I was a scrapper. I was, constantly getting in fights, very angry and at odds against.
So what were some of the beliefs? So if we look at, we're going to touch on the prism of perspective real quick. So the belief systems we look at, we have identity beliefs. What do you believe to be true about yourself? What is your purpose? What are your values? What are your gifts? Then you drop into beliefs about others. And part of the beliefs about others, I think, is really an idea of how big is your compassion circle? Who's included in there? Is that you? You and family, you family and friends, and what happens when somebody slips outside of there, right? When there's an outsider, how are you what are your beliefs about someone that's not in that inner circle? Did that show up for you, or
it doesn't? Not directly. It's not standing out as something that really pops out. And maybe that's just because I never leaned into it. I never really thought about it from that perspective. And I'm thinking okay, I'm trying to remember. It was when I was in, high school and all that stuff. I guess we had our little cliques, but I seemed to be tied in with a bunch of different cliques.
Okay, yep.
But then in the same hand, it's funny, I'm thinking about it now. I never really allowed myself to get close to any of them. So I think from that compassion, I was very protective.
Right.
Because there was probably some underlying belief that, I was going to be disappointed, or maybe that was coming from that place of I'm unlovable, so I don't want to get too close anyways.
Or let people close enough, because at some level, if you can keep some distance and if you can pivot and move, right? So right when somebody gets close enough, if I'm not in a group, I can go to another group. I can find safety. So tell me a little more about that. What was it that caused you said you scrapped a lot. Tell me how did that come about?
It was my protective mechanism.
What were you protecting, do you think?
Probably just my significance. If somebody was threatening my significance in the world, I guess, taking that bird's eye hindsight view, then I was gonna fight for it, and it was probably way overboard too. It was more coming from that, that victim. I am not going to be your victim, so I'm going to fight, kind of,
right. Or in Prism of Perspective, you have a couple different levels of energy that are fairly lower levels of resonance. Mm-hmm. One is victim. The other one is fighter, right? Okay. The fighter is right above victim. I still think that the world's dangerous and I need to defend myself.
Absolutely.
Or the first one is I feel the world's dangerous. That's the victim and I can't defend myself. The fighter is I feel the world is dangerous and I'm going to defend myself.
Yes.
And so you're kind of in that kind of fighter scrapper energy.
Yes, definitely. Resonate with that category.
How long did that energy kind of exemplify how you were feeling and showing up in the world?
That probably carried me through to my early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, it was into the early 20s. And, leading up to that point, I never did finish high school. I dropped out. I did go back and get the GED, and would eventually go back, but that was after... Yep. Things shifted and changed. And so I had my daughter was born at the age of 21, bought my first house at the age of 22, bought some more real estate. I said I had quite a bit of, early financial success in my early 20s, just that, I guess, that fighter mentality.
Right. And so you kind of almost pushed away from, I don't need this establishment thing that you're telling me I need. I'm going to go do it on my own way. Yeah. Is that kind of the energy? And then with that, you were able to fight for, scrap for, and begin to put together, the financial trappings.
Right.
What else was going on in your world? Sometimes when we have a singular focus in that way, it shows other things, challenges show up in other places. What was going on for you?
Well, as a result of being singularly focused, I neglected everything else, including my physical body and, even for that, my mental and psychological health.
Right. Things you take very seriously today.
Absolutely, which I imagine we'll kind of get to that. Yeah. But it was even my role as a father, and we weren't married, but it was my significant other, and even my role in that family unit was highly neglected because I was singularly focused. And I think the one thing we've come to know is that that's kind of great, but it's not sustainable.
Right.
And it was not sustainable, and it crashed and burned hard.
and so if we go back to beliefs, what were your beliefs around that time? Because a lot of times we can look at the beliefs and say, well, my actions were motivated by a belief that X, I was going to get to a certain place financially and then expand my focus. Or what do you think you were thinking at that time?
I think, looking back at it, and I have spent some time looking back at this, is that yes, for as much as I did resonate with that rebel archetype, I also recognize that, okay, society is telling me if I do X, Y, and Z, then I will, throw it in quotations, I will be successful. Right. So I was kind of adhering to what culture and society told me was meant successful. If you work really, really, really hard, and if you buy a house, and if you drive a new car, and and if you have a family, then you are going to.
You're checking boxes really early, right?
I was checking the boxes based on the checklist of culture and society's definition of success.
Right.
And it failed.
So you had mentioned that you weren't given the focus to, being the father that you might have been, or being the spouse. And you also mentioned that you weren't paying attention to your health. And we've had this conversation a little bit in the past. So sitting here as, someone who's super fit and who I know takes incredible commitment to their own psychological and emotional health, tell me how that was showing up for you. Like, what were the consequences of not paying attention to that?
First of all, the most obvious one was my weight. I got all the way up at, 5'10". That was 255 pounds. And,
it's really big, muscular guy, huh?
Yeah, far from it. No, it was, I think it was, I was like, what? I'm up to a size 42 waist?
Yeah, that's a bit different, huh?
Yeah, considerably different. But yeah, I actually remember it was almost traumatic. Like, I remember trying to put on a pair of 40 pants and go, oh, shit. Right.
And so can you go back and think about, like, were you trying to suppress something? I'm an alcoholic, so I look back at those days and, I wasn't necessarily overweight. In fact, at that time, I was kind of almost like an anorexic, not anorexic in my weight, but, anorexics trying to hold on to that one thing that they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I was like super physically fit while being drunk, Right. But it, so it was showing up in my drinking. Do you think that was showing up in your eating, or what was happening there?
So with the eating, I was eating the way I was taught to eat, the standard American diet. Yep. Yeah, it was pretty sad. And other than that, I'd say I was holding on to a lot. All of that rebellion, all of that anger, I was holding on to all that. And I was, working in construction. So you would think I wouldn't, I was so, just the work that I did was so laborious, and I was working 60 hours a week. And at one point I counted 54 straight working days, no days off, so that kind of workaholic thing. And you'd think there's no reason why I should have put on that much weight. But, I did because I was hanging on to all this, again, can you prove this scientifically? I don't know. Right. Maybe at least not right now. Right. But in my judgment, I was hanging on to all this emotional and psychological baggage. Right. And I was suppressing it. Kind of like.
Well, they do kind of know that when you're stressed, right? Mm-hmm. There's anger. The cortisol makes it less effect. We make ourselves less effective as fat burning machines. And the other thing you'll hear all the time, you cannot out exercise a bad diet. So a lot of times when we're physically active, we kind of give ourselves a pass. Many people give themselves a pass. Mm-hmm. Even the interesting thing is, even people that do a lot of cardio often don't lose weight because they're like, well, I did cardio for an hour today. I deserve this, whatever the thing is.
Cheeseburger,
whatever it happens to me, and then you're like, so what's your goal and objective? You deserve it in what way? Do you deserve the outcome of the exercise, or, what are you trying to do? And so, the compounding effect. I also, later in life, not at that age, but a little later, I got my weight up to 235. So, I got there too. And for me, it was just kind of incremental, and it was incremental, but it was still fast. I look at it and I kind of went from about 195 to 235 in less than a year. Mm. And so you say it was incremental, it's like a pound a week, but it's a pound a week. It's like every time you step on the scale, it's like, a couple ounces, right? And so you don't really notice. And all of a sudden I remember somehow or another believing that I had gotten more muscular, although there was no reason to believe it. It was like, it's not all fat, but, and of course nothing is all fat. You always, I had marbled muscle, right? I would have been a nice piece of steak.
Yeah, not fat, I'm big boned.
But anyway, so the singular focus in your life really allowed you to, I'm going to go out, I'm going to earn, I'm going to create, I'm going to do whatever work is necessary. And then almost like an entitlement maybe around don't you see that I'm doing this for the family? That's my thing, right?
Absolutely.
I already did that. I already gave at the office, essentially, right? Yeah. And so what else was expected of you? You're like, well, maybe that's not really what I'm interested in doing right now. What began to make that pivot for you?
Yeah. So it was, and it's funny how we always do that. We strategically, through those big decisions we make with significant others, like we got through the holidays, January rolls around, and my significant other made sure that I knew that she was done. And it was okay, and that just started. That was like the domino,
right?
That it's like, now we have this young daughter. I've got my, at the time she was 2 years old, and that started the process. That was just the beginning. Okay.
Did it come out? I mean, when you go reflect back on it, was it really a surprise or?
No. Yeah. No, it wasn't. Especially knowing what I know now, looking back, and even relatively shortly after there, like even though it did kind of come out of left field, like there was no build up to it, I can still look back and go, yeah, no, I probably wouldn't have put up with my shit either.
It's interesting that my wife, Shay, and I were dating when I was I was out of college. She was still in grad school, and I was still actively drinking. And I remember her had a drunken evening, and she really, in kindness and gentleness, she was just like, yeah, just so you know, I have no interest in this at all. You're kind of a fun guy, but zero interest. And it got me thinking, and, really played a big role, I think, in helping me get sober, was not only was she not interested, really no one of real consequence should be interested. You're like, well, what am I bringing? Right. Like who's signing up for this? And so that was, I think in a similar way, you had yours on, after January. I had mine after that drunken night at Skeeter's, So so we get those messages. But I'll go to my drinking. I think about like the identity belief. I had become this idea. I had created this persona in my mind that, I was this really cool, fun, partying person that I don't really even connect with at all. And when I was younger, I was like really, but I mean, like straight arrow. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, that doesn't work. Create this false persona. And then you live into it. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, what am I defending? Right? It's like we defend our identity belief even when it doesn't serve us.
That was definitely the identity. And that was a big thing for me, was the loss of identity. I mean, I kind of hinged all of my beliefs about who I was as an identity as this successful person, because I, brought in the income, and I, had the family unit, and, everything was this, I checked all the boxes. Right. So I was very proud in that identity. And when that was the first piece of that identity that got ripped out, and then that just cascaded, and that was just, that eventually led to me getting arrested. So when I was younger, I sold pot, which is funny because it has a completely different meaning today than it did then. But
so you were true believer? No,
long before that.
True leaf or whatever they call it.
So I had this little thing that I did, and during my teenage years, I for the most part stopped doing it. Once my daughter was born, but then step one, the family broke apart, and was like, oh man, I tried to rekindle some old contacts, and ended up landing myself in the hands of the sheriff's office, and. So that was just the domino, like one domino led to the next. And then all of a sudden the money dried up, the banks took the houses back, and it was just one thing after another. And I was left with nothing. Yeah. There was nothing left of who I thought I was.
So we build up a persona. Sounds like you did, right? You had an identity belief of, I'm Robbie, the hardworking guy that shows up, does what's necessary. I got a great work ethic. I got a cute little girl, my significant other, and we're this couple, and people see me, and I'm like, I've kind of jumped ahead of a lot of the people that I know, right? You said you're like 21 years older, in that ballpark.
Yep.
And, a lot of other kids are still just, I say even, but a lot of times kids that go into college, all they've been doing is partying for 3 years, right?
Right.
They're 3 years into their 4-year party, And you're like, I'm starting to put stuff together. I'm getting ahead. And then all of a sudden you realize that the house of cards you had built wasn't quite as solid as you felt. And all of a sudden, you take one block out, take another one block, in construction, that, right? Your foundation starts to shake, and it can shake in a hurry. And it sounds like you're shook in a hurry. So let's go back. You said there was, you got arrested for pot, for selling pot. And so what was the consequence of that?
It ended up, it actually ended really good, but not before a lot of change. But basically so I spent about 13 months in that time period. Now at this point, to kind of paint the picture of the timeline, I think I'm either 24 or 25 years old at this point. And I spent about 13 months going to court 3 times a month, twice, like one for child support, another for child custody, and another one for criminal charges.
So you're well known.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a rough year. And, that was a lot. Yeah. I don't know what more to say there, but that was a lot. And the whole process really kind of forced me. So I went against those criminal charges for 13 months. I was going to court, kept getting moved and pushed. And during that 13 months, I completely reevaluated, my entire life and just knew that something had to change.
Let's dive on that, because I know that we shared a little bit of the story that when we're at that men's weekend, that you shared a little bit of that story about almost like a miraculous event, right? Something you look at something that happened and you're like, well, that seems like an intervention, right? Like something, synchronicity of the universe.
Yeah. So a little bit into that process of going to court 3 times a month, I did get invited to a Christmas party, and that was nice. Went to the Christmas party, ended up, connecting with a lovely young woman. And she came, slept over Saturday night. And I woke up in the morning and hungover and, kind of pop up out of bed and go, oh, shit, I got to go to church. You got to go. And that whole thing came out of, I remember, this very machismo kind of masculine identity that I had. And I was sharing with you that at one point, leading up to that, the reason why I thought I had to go to church was because I walked into a Subway restaurant for a lunch one day, and coming out, I saw a Natural Awakenings magazine, kind of one of those new age spiritual magazines sitting on top in display there. And it was unlike anything I would ever have touched up to that point. But I also knew I needed to change something. So I grabbed this Natural Awakenings magazine, and I get to the truck and I throw it in the back seat, and that's where it stays. About a week goes by, I look back there, I see it, I pull it up, and I'm skimming through it. Nothing's really catching my attention. But then there's this community calendar in the back. And, and I just, the whole time I'm, just going through this place where something's got to change, and I don't know what it is. Something's got to change, and I don't know what it is. And that was kind of my motto. And I get to the community calendar, it popped off the page, Manifesting Change in Your Life with Mike Dooley. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's me. I'm supposed to go do that. And I look a little bit further, and it's like, oh, damn, it's in a church. It's like, oh, that's probably not going to work. And yeah.
So the church thing was kind of new for you, huh?
Yeah, the church was completely foreign for me. That was a completely new thing. So that was why I kicked this woman out of bed, whose name I never got. And I was like, oh, I got to go to church. You got to go. And then I go to church, and now Mike Dooley was one of the speakers on the movie The Secret. They had The Secret, Rhonda Byrd, I think.
Yep, I remember.
And he was one of the guys that said, thoughts become things.
Yeah, I don't remember. Which one was he?
Tall, shaved head. And he was the one who kind of held his finger. Thoughts become things. He did that.
It was that was interesting. Some of the people in that I thought I really connected with and have continued to follow, and some of them I thought were a little stretching the bounds of what my manifestation beliefs. Like I think Michael Beckwith is someone who I think is just awesome. I don't remember him.
Yeah, who also got arrested for pot charges.
Did he? There you go. I knew I liked him. But anyway, so that's cool. So you got there, and this was actually at the Unity Church, if I understand correctly.
That is correct.
Right?
Yeah,
which is for those of you that are unfamiliar, it's a really open kind of spirituality. Yes. I would say, right?
Yeah.
It's very much a connection to the universe, a belief in God. It's a very open and accepting I guess one might guess that, right? If they're having the speaker from The Secret, you're probably not showing up at, a Pentecostal church.
Right. Absolutely. And, and during my time, I did end up becoming a member of the church, and I got into the volunteering. This is all while I'm, going to court.
Yep.
I did get involved with it. And we had speakers come talk about Buddhism and Hinduism.
Right.
And very fit under the brackets of New Age.
Right. In New Age. But I mean, when you think about it, somebody's, Buddhism, Hinduism,
ancient,
like how, that's New Age. Yeah. It's like 2,600 years old. It's just getting kicked off, it's just getting foundation going here. We're going to see how we can do, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, so you had some exposure to some ways of thinking that was different than you had.
Yeah. So that specific day when, and it's funny, I think about it in terms of like divine orchestration. Now I showed up there with a crazy hangover.
Right.
I was just foggy, but I was committed. So I showed up. And
so let's just stop for a second and think about all the things that are going on here, right? One is that you were willing to let go of your real attachment to who you were and how you'd show up and who you'd be, right? You
needed to,
right? You were you had heard the universe in a way, or you'd heard whatever. And you were like, okay, so the path I'm on, and this is so important because so often we become attached to our path, even when it's not serving us, right? So I drank for 15 years. The first day I drank, I blacked out, and I woke up that day of like, I'm never doing that again. 15 years later, it finally sticks, right? And you look at it and say, okay, so this path isn't really working for you. And so you open up a little bit, you pick up a little magazine, you look in it, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this thing that's a little different. But then you're also go in, and it sounds like you were at least open enough to hear the messaging, right? You weren't filtering through the old perspective of rigidity and I know
judgment
and like, I'm independent. I don't need anything. No one's going to help me here. You're open. And again, for, people that are challenging their lives, that openness, letting go of you ever hear that saying, you have to let go of who you are to become who you might be. Right.
Right.
So if you had held on to and showed up as this rigid example of your life up until that point, the message probably would have bounced off like Superman, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we all have to be vulnerable and aware that, okay, if we really want to change, we have to be open to that. And the things we have to be open to, again, is redefining who we are and not being so attached to the stories we've told ourselves that we make stories up to make sense of the world. And a lot of times if those stories aren't really working, or even when they are working, you got to look at it and go, is that completely true?
Right.
And it sounds like at that point you were really ready to listen to something. So you got involved in the church, you got involved in some, you said volunteer work. I know you have great relationships that have come out of that. Mm-hmm. How did, because this is pivotal too. We talked about a little bit about the tribes, right? Who you were hanging out with. And did your tribe change?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about tribal change, because I think that's a big one too, right?
Well, and I also just want to capture because I left that church that day in tears, and the bottom line message that I left with, that I'd heard in a way that I needed to hear, was ready to hear for the first time in my life, was that I got myself here. I can't get myself out.
Right.
That was like step one. It was like, I am here because of the choices I made. This is what I have created in my life. And even though it's a big shit show, it's like, I created it. So I can create something different. And that was the first time I felt empowered. And that was probably the first time, to my recollection, that I ever actually allowed myself to even cry.
What I love about that, Robbie, is when you think about what was going on there, accepting responsibility.
Yes.
Right. And so often we want to blame. And I know that I'm not pointing fingers anywhere. I look at different decisions I made in my life, and, I can find people that I can point to and like, oh, well, had I had a father or whatever, whatever the story happens to be. But the truth is, as long as you're looking outside, there really is no solution.
Yeah.
And regardless of the situation, if we accept, I love the concept of accepting 100% responsibility. Sometimes when you bring that up, someone will say, well, well, there were certainly other circumstances. And I'm like, no doubt.
Yeah.
But if we look at the word differently and we think, I'm accepting 100% response ability.
Yeah. Radical accountability.
Right.
Yeah.
And that at that moment, you recognized that you could respond to whatever the circumstance was, right? Yes. You were 100% respond able, nice. Right? And you could come in and whatever it was that had gotten you there, you could make some pivots. And there was enough pain to motivate, right? So we move away from pain and toward pleasure. So the pain you've mentioned, what were the pleasure, like what was exciting to you about that? What was compelling, pulling you forward at that moment?
Looking back at it, I'd say curiosity.
Okay.
Curiosity was and still is a huge player in my life, and at least did become later on, after this period. But it was just, wow, if I guess, some of the thinking was, if I accomplish this with this wool over my eyes, what can I accomplish without the wool over my eyes? And that led to just, ultimately a series of experiments.
Right.
Like, okay, let's try this on. Let's try this on. And of course, in the beginning, everything we try on is it, it's the thing. Yeah. And then I like to believe that as we kind of get through that process and we get a couple things under our belt, it's like, oh, that was just that for then. Right. What's next? Right. And it becomes this curiosity, where are the edges? Where are the boundaries? And can I flirt with them and play with them? And it's a big motivator for me.
And tell me if this resonates with you. I think that as you try on different things and you find out that even if they didn't work right, that you were able to bounce, it gives you so much more, gives all of us so much more confidence that, okay, I can try in something else.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we're scared, it seems like, nope, I know the secret. This is, not to play on the secret, but I know this is the answer. It's right here and I can't let go of it. And then we end up defending, again, an ego created persona rather than remaining open. And one of the things that I think about when I think about defense is if you think about a country, right? And we'll use Ukraine at this moment. From my perspective, no fault of their own, they're having to invest essentially everything in defending. Mm-hmm. So there are no resources really available to build.
Right.
We do that to ourselves, right? Trying to defend this thing, it doesn't give us any opportunity to move forward because we're like, no, I have it. Instead of staying open and saying, you know what, I'm okay. Right. And even when we're having conversations, let's say you and I are disagreeing around something. If I'm so invested in like trying to defend what I believe, I can't even hear what you have to say.
Right.
So how can we grow? So that seems like at this point in your life, very open, let go of your defensive, became really curious and tried on a bunch of different stuff. And in that evolution, tell me some of the things you learned.
I'd say the first, having grown up with no like spiritual exposure or anything, no religious exposure or anything like that, the first thing was just, the exploration of this like existence or this life behind life. That was kind of how it started. It was like, wow, there is something more. And I wouldn't even I guess growing up, I didn't consider myself really anything, pagan, agnostic, or atheist or anything. I was just like, I just didn't really disinterested. Period. I would say there was a part of me that was leaning, I guess, towards this like agnostic thing, and then I just got as you said, the house of cards came crumbling down. My identity was completely swept away from me, and that started the process of looking at this more spiritual side of life, what is going on behind the scenes, behind this 3-dimensional world that we're all engaged and interacting in and trying to accomplish things. And and that was the first step, is going into this. I don't have to pursue finances, and I don't have to do this. And
we can become a little too flowy in that situation, right?
And I did go a little bit too flowy in that situation. So. But that was the first phase. It was like I had it, but it was the extreme. I tend to lean towards extremes,
No way.
First it was extreme rebellion over to extreme spirituality. I'm
going
learning.
to be the most enlightened.
Yes. Yeah.
Watch my enlightenment. I think we've all traveled that journey a little bit. But again, one of the things I think is interesting to look at is you opened up, but it wasn't as if you clung to something really. It doesn't seem as if you were like clinging to and then having certainty around that. You were reaching and allowing for some uncertainty to continue to allow your life to evolve. Is that accurate, or am I making that up?
I'd say there were probably parts where I was very certain that this was the answer, and I was going to scream it from the rooftops and make sure everybody knew not only what it was, but that I knew it.
Right.
And I can't think of anything specific, but as life does, is we do go through our we do get humbled.
Right.
So I would imagine there was probably a humbling in there somewhere, and then another reevaluation. And then the more I continued to do that, then the less I judged each iteration. And I started learning more from it without being attached to it. So over time, I learned how to not cling to these, because it went from one identity, the rebel, to the next identity, the enlightened. And I was clinging to that a little bit. And then in the same hand, I was also learning about non-attachment and stuff like that. So then I started practicing, and it's just interesting to watch how it evolves. Now I cling to nothing and absorb as much as I possibly can.
Right.
And it's all a series of experiments. Like, let's play with it and of one thing.
Another friend of mine likes to say it's like, make life a game worth playing. And that's kind of the situation, right? You really like open, exploring, like the concept of the infinite game, right? We're going to continue to play. It's going to continue to unfold. And the purpose is to continue to play, and hopefully to invite other people to play. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And to be working back and forth, kind of like we are. So I know from our conversation that, you had said you left school, you went back, got your GED, things along those lines. But I know education has become something that's really important to you. Not necessarily formalized education, right? It doesn't necessarily matter that we have a certificate to hang, but that we have skills and capabilities and insights and awareness. So tell me a little bit about how that evolved for you.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, in school, even though I didn't finish, and again, hindsight, we look back and go, I was bored out of my mind. The school, it was not fun. It was like, I totally, I dropped the ball on homework almost, habitually. And, but then when it came, a test was thrown in front of me, it was like a B+ with zero studying.
Right. Yeah.
And it used to make others around me kind of angry. It's like, how'd you do that? So
learning always came easily,
but it was never really there was no autonomy in what I was learning through the academic system, and being the rebel that I was, and maybe that could have been different had the education system not been so antiquated and was able to cater to my personality. Not that it's its job to do that, but it
should be its job to cater to people and where they are and what they're learning and what their interests are, right? Yes. If we look at how we learn and we recognize that, being curious and interested and meeting each person where they are. I don't know if you follow Saul Khan Academy guy at all.
No, I don't.
So Khan Academy is this hugely successful online teaching and training for education to bring world-class education to free for everyone in the world.
Nice.
And one of the things he talks about, and he was in this particular space, he was talking about math. He said, really, everyone can become good at math. The challenge is that we're trying to fit everybody into a particular box, moving at a particular pace. And so if you don't go back to the building concept, right? So if you're building a foundation and, you go to this building and they're like, okay, Robbie, you're responsible for building the foundation. And they show back up at the end of the week and they're like, okay, we're ready to go to the second floor. And you're like, well, I got 80% of the floor done. They don't put the second level on because the building's going to collapse.
Yeah.
But that's what they do in school. And so all of a sudden somebody's at, I got 95% of that concept, and they move them, and then they get 90, and then they get 85, and then they get 8, and then all of a sudden it's like they don't even want to try.
Yep.
And so now you have disinterested, disengaged students. And instead, I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing, but it should certainly be something we can figure out.
Right. It's worth having the conversation.
It's worth figuring out, right? Because if you think about what we're willing to do to extract resources, right? So like, for instance, you think about like, here's my phone, right? So like, what are they doing to extract the resources they need to make my phone? They got people digging into the dirt and all over different places in the world. But there's so much capability in humanity that we don't ever develop because it's going to be hard.
Right. Or not profitable enough.
Right. Not profitable, not immediately profitable enough. Whereas if you think about, okay, but now we have these people that could be great contributors, that then we complain that they're extracting from society. And you're like, well, we kind of created that. Yep. Right. And again, everybody has responsibility, but not everyone has the same start, And so when I look at that from an educational perspective, I think it's just such a waste. So it's great that you were able to kind of pop out of that with a natural ability to learn. Yeah. And then when you were able to tap into your own curiosities, it seems like you really accelerated your learning.
Great. It was a blast. I had a blast. I was like, now I guess. And
you continue to have a blast if I'm witnessing this correctly, right?
It's a joy in my life. And one of the points I was getting to was that I don't think I read an entire book my entire early life. Like it wasn't until I think roughly around the age of 24 before I read my first book. Right. And then I did another one and then another one. And then now at this point, I've read hundreds of books. Right. But it's just funny, and I always did the book reports, but I was clever enough to skim through, grab what I need, and still get an A on my book report, right. And not ever actually have to read the damn book.
Right. Yeah. In many ways, I when I was younger, I think I had like ADD or ADHD or whatever they would call it now, but it was never anything, but I was smart enough to hide it. And so even though I wasn't like a really strong reader as a young child, and in fact, it was something that caused me some stress, I was able to hide it because I could learn well enough auditorily. But, when I got sober, so when I was 30, I started reading kind of like you, and different people have different perspectives. I have been exposed to things in ways that have accelerated my ability to move forward in my life in ways that I never would have been had I not been an avid reader. And like you, for the last 30 years, I've been reading approximately a book a week. And you just have an opportunity to listen to the thinking of people that have spent a tremendous amount of time becoming expert in whatever area they are. And for very little money, they're going to share their secrets.
Yeah.
So, it's been really helpful. What are the things how do you like to learn most now? I know that we've both done a couple of similar courses through the Flow Research Collective. So flow is an area that we're both really excited about. What else has really got your attention?
Yeah. Hands-on, anytime I can get in a learning opportunity, that is, and that's especially my body and my physical capabilities. Yep. Have kind of become a training ground for me.
Yep.
Currently, again, from going from that 255 pound, significantly overweight. I did within that first 2 years, I did end up losing 100 pounds. I went all the way down to 155. Yep. Currently at 165 now. Yep. And I know I do a lot of calisthenics and gymnastics and a lot of just movement type training. I've got some yoga background. Yep. And what I've come to realize is, this is my training and practice ground, and the same theories that apply in the exploration and experimentation with what can I do with my body, it also shows up for what I can do with my mind and how I can learn a new topic. And it's the same thing. It's trying to learn something new technologically.
Right.
It's okay, at first it's really, really hard and it's clunky and it's awkward. So let me lean into it, do a couple reps, and then I'm going to back away, let that incubate, lean in, do a few more reps, and then back up, let it incubate. And just kind of going through that process of putting in the reps and recognizing that it is a process.
Right.
So learning new technologies, playing with different, I know the big thing for me, like if I was saying I'm working on finding mastery in something, it's I'm trying to find some semblance of mastery in working with my biology.
Yeah.
And therefore having
Tell us more about that. I know that biocongruence 77?
Biocongruence, that's the project. That's my baby. That's what I'm working on. And that's the whole idea is biocongruence is working with your biology.
Right.
Rather than against it. And I know that's a big concept that's taught also in the Flow Research Collective.
Yes. Yeah.
But I also felt like there was a lot of holes in there. I remember like first going through Stephen Kotler's, The Art of Impossible, and it was like 2 pages. It's like in order, for all of this to be true, you must have this in place. Basically, you must meet those biological baseline needs.
Yeah, biology, neurology, and physiology kind of have to line up, right?
Right,
and
right.
I think it even goes back to William James, right? To have your body, your neurology working for you rather than against you.
Right, exactly. But, and then it's just like, okay, well, what does that look like? What does that actually look like? And that was my own frustration with feeling like there was a gap there led to, this experiment that I started back in 2020 for myself and shared it with others. And it's like, I got it kind of chalked down to 3 primary things. And I do implement this in my own life, and that's creating good mental, physical, and nervous system hygiene.
Yeah.
Just like we brush our teeth every single day for good oral.
And hygiene might be habits, right? So another word of saying that, would that be accurate?
Yeah. And I can't spit it off, but I've actually researched all the words and
hygiene works better for you.
Congruence works. Hygiene works. Like if you actually go to the dictionary and read it, and it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So make a distinction for me in what that would mean between like habits and hygiene.
It pretty much is the same thing. I mean, just like oral hygiene is the habits, brush your teeth every single day. It's like not just on Mondays and Fridays, but it's something we do every day in order to maintain good oral hygiene.
Right.
So if you want to maintain good mental hygiene, just for an example, it's like the exercise is a huge component on our mental health and wellness. And then you factor in meditation. Now, the meditation, let's remove the spiritual side of it.
Right.
And basically, it is a training tool to practice awareness. You're, again, putting the reps in.
Yep.
This is what the reps look like for teaching yourself to become fully aware of your thoughts. And that way, and it's through that awareness, we can catch when our thinking is taking us down a road that could end up ruining our day or ruining our week.
Right. Having so much more receptivity rather than all of a sudden finding out like, man, I allowed that negative thought to ruin my day.
Right.
When you're more aware, you can respond so much more rapidly.
Yeah, and it's not going to stop that thought from coming, but it can stop that thought from hijacking.
Which is so important to recognize when people aren't that familiar with meditation. And, often they get frustrated because they're like, oh, I was, focused on the flame and my breath. And all of a sudden a thought came in and I was like, screw it, I suck at this.
Right.
Instead of like, actually, that's happening to everybody.
That's the point. That is the practice.
Right. Yeah. You became aware that thought came in, the idea that was what you were looking for.
Yeah.
Not that the thought happened and it took you down a rat hole and 4 hours later, and 2 big arguments later, you realize, wow, I think I got captured.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that the awareness, that thought coming in is the rep.
Right.
That is the rep. And to keep getting those reps in. So it's like almost it switches. Like if to really embrace that idea that thought sneaking in is the rep, then that's how you get the best mental workout is you do more reps and you start celebrating when those thoughts sneak in. You're like, there's another one.
I found it.
There's
right.
another one.
Yeah.
There's another
I knew
one.
it was coming, right?
Yeah.
And I think another thing that, to me that is so critical is that I don't know about you, but I remember believing very much in a fixed mindset. Very much a belief that, I could get in better shape, but whatever my intellect was kind of what it was. I actually remember thinking it's kind of cool because I thought I was smart, and like, ooh, but I now look at it as being just like muscle and just like any other capability and something that we can really develop. And it gives us an opportunity, whether it's through meditation or mindfulness or visualization or whatever the mental exercise of really doing that. And I find physical exercise and the introspection that is necessary, right? The awareness of your body that is necessary to really do the kind of like gymnastics or yoga, things like that you're making reference to. Also, I feel, don't have the science to it, is seemingly having a huge effect on my cognitive capabilities.
Yeah, the neuroplasticity. And, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with my training partner yesterday, and we were talking the difference between like weight training and doing gymnastics work. Is weight training, you're really stressing the muscles. Now, when you're getting into all these like really hard positions and like gymnastics and stuff like that, you're stressing the nervous system. Right. Doing handstand work where you're training your body to be upside down and doing like working on planches where you're putting, it's a lot of strain on the nervous system too. So it's a different kind of tiring. So it's like we were talking about the programming, how we break it up.
And I know Andrew Huberman was talking about learning. And one of the things he talked about is one of the big things that we can do on the front side of learning is lose our balance because it forces the body's all of a sudden like, whoa, I'm in danger. I better learn how to solve this. And so all the gymnastics work where you're upside down or, and again, it has to be progressive. Like once you get to the point where you can nail a handstand and it's not then you're no longer out of balance.
Right.
Then you have to find, okay, I have to do a handstand and I'm leaning a particular way, or I'm doing a handstand, I'm doing something a little different. But that's, such a great training ground. And in our time that we have today, in our society, so many people are neglecting physical, cognitive development, and the end of their lives are just horrendous.
Right.
Horrendous.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, especially after my initial run into adulthood, where everything failed. It was like, the priorities shifted around and, no matter what, and I know you turned me on to Attia's.
Peter Attia, yeah.
Yeah, Peter Attia, yeah. You turned me on to him. And I pulled so much. And I love that idea that, assuming I did make it to my mid-90s, I want to be able to put my carry-on into the overhead compartment.
Right.
That is important to me, if nothing else, to have that health and that mobility and to go into later years with that strength. And that has actually really changed my approach to my fitness.
We'll go back a little bit to the thing around we were talking about before we got on here. We were talking about the idea of flow and going, to 100% or whatever. And I have found, and I trained, I worked with Arthur Jones, the guy that invented high intensity training. And so we would go to failure, we'd go beyond failure. And it wasn't even really so much his teachings as us taking his teachings too far. And so we were, supersetting negatives, forced negatives, all the stuff. Today, I just tap on the edges of what I'm capable of and then give my body time to respond. And my belief is like, if you were running a business and you were getting to the point where you were approaching needing new help, you would hire that help. You wouldn't wait until you were gone beyond that point and then hire the help. And so you think, okay, you don't think your body's smarter than that?
Right.
So is your body really have to go beyond what it's capable of before it adds capacity? I don't think so. And my experience is no, it doesn't. As long as you continue to just kind of gently tap on those edges, your capacity, I have found that capacity just keeps expanding.
Yeah. And the consistency is the
consistency is huge key. Right. Yeah. Consistency, keep tap. Yeah. You can't do it once and walk away. You got to keep doing it, but it doesn't have to be something that is, I love my workouts and it seems like you, right? Like one of my favorite things. And so many people don't do, I hate exercise. Well, it's because it's been introduced in my mind. It's been introduced to our society like the biggest loser and we're going to crush you and it's going to be horrible. And, I go into these spinning classes, which, I love the gym I belong to, but you go into these spinning classes and they're like, you should be hating me right now. I'm like, first of all, you're not driving my workout. I am. And secondly, why? Like, what are you trying to do? Do you really think like all of a sudden someone's going to jump from one level of fitness to a radically different level because they worked really hard today? No, they're not. All it's going to be is a tiny little increment. So stimulate accordingly.
Right.
So,
yeah. And then I was thinking, and it's kind of embedded into the culture. Like even being on a sports team, it's like, if you get in trouble, we are going to punish you with doing push-ups.
Right. Yeah.
Like what's the message behind the message? What does that tell me about push-ups? It tells me push-ups are a punishment. So, am I going to do push-ups in my adulthood? No, because I'm not going to punish myself.
Right. Yeah. Especially in a lot of kids that aren't athletic or aren't in shape at the time, then it's also a humiliation.
Right.
And so they're you're thinking, are they really going to go back to the gym when they were humiliated in gym class?
No, it's too much trauma and wounds there.
And so it kind of comes back to the same thing with education. If we can meet people where they are, everybody can be physically fit. Everybody can be quite capable if they understand the exercise. And when I use the word exercise, I mean anything that's going to expand your capacity, intellectual capacity, emotional. We have exercises in all of those. And and from my perspective, you tell me what you think. It really only works when we meet ourselves where we are.
I don't think there's any other way.
Right?
Yeah, there's no other way. And it's like, in order to work with the truth, you got to put the truth on the table.
You got to put the truth on the table and be where you are. And from there, like you said, you found yourself in a courtroom or in that church room kind of going, I put myself here. Mm-hmm. I can get myself. So wherever someone is, whether it's you have a financial situation or emotional situation or a physical situation, whatever it is, just recognize, accept 100% responsibility. You put yourself there. Not blaming, nobody's blaming anyone, but the truth is that the actions you took up until this point kind of landed you there.
Yep.
And the actions you take from this point forward can get you anywhere, right? You look at a map and it's like, here's you are. Oh, where do you want to go? Google doesn't say, oh, I can't get you there from there, right? And your Google map doesn't say, oh, no. You're there, you can't get there.
You can't get there from here.
Right? Yeah, you can. It might be a little bit of a longer journey. You might have to go a couple bridges and do whatever, but you can get there.
Right.
And so what's been great, what I loved originally about just meeting you is like the way that you had taken on some challenges and really opened up and then stayed curious and incrementally just kept adding new layers of capacity to your life. And so I was intrigued by that, and I'm excited to continue to watch you grow. Really appreciate you as a friend, and I'm so grateful you were able to come down here.
Glad to be here. This was great.
Thanks so much, buddy.
All right.
Yeah. Have a great one.